Greetings, Benjamin J from BENZTRAINZ with another in the series. Well, a follow-up on that slope-back tender that I built last night. I've just got it epoxied together, and it is for all intent and purpose finished. So I wanted to do a quick video so you can just see how I did this. So I started with this Lionel tender body, and I just got it epoxied together. And you can see how I made this. And it's a Lionel front truck. And I took the roller that I had and epoxied it on the steel truck, which supplied ground to the chassis itself. So a Lionel truck on the front, modified with this roller. A Marx truck on the rear, as you see. Front coupler is Lionel, rear coupler is Marx. And like I said, I just got this thing epoxied together. There's no screws to line up because this is not the chassis for this tender body. But the interesting thing about it, of course, is the fact that it works. It actually works quite well. We turn the power on. I'll just run some power to the rail. As you can see, it works just absolutely splendidly. It works just absolutely perfectly. And the nice thing, of course, is that it didn't cost anything. It was really simple to do it. It was tedious and time-consuming because I had to make the whole thing from scratch, literally. I had to make the truck, and then, of course, wire it, and then install the light, modify the tender to accept the light. And so it took a couple hours to build it, but I think it was well worth the effort. And I have a lighted slope-back tender where I did not have one yesterday. So I want to take this around so you can actually see it running now that it's finished. It works really, really well. As you can see, it is flicker-free. The best part about it, of course, is that it didn't cost anything. Just made out of junk out of the parts box. All mismatched parts, of course. Lionel body, the chassis itself is Marx. One Lionel truck, one Marx truck. And I had to modify the Lionel truck to accept that power roller. But as you can see, this works really, really well. It's unique, it's one of a kind. And again, best of all, it didn't cost anything. Really, really simple and straightforward to do it. Like I said, it was just tedious and time-consuming to build it because I actually had to build it. Basically, I had to modify everything to turn it into one integral car. But it worked. So what I will do is use a marker and darken this truck, and it will look almost identical to the rear Marx truck. Again, the nice thing about it is it didn't cost anything, and it works. Really, really simple to do it. It was just tedious because you have to basically build the thing from scratch. But I had this old spotlight, and I had the body, and I had the chassis. So I figured I would try to put it all together into one package and see if I could actually make a lighted slope-back tender. And it worked. It worked really, really well. So it was definitely worth the effort to do it. A little bit of cleanup, and this is going to look almost new. So it's epoxied together, and I just got it epoxied, I don't know, probably an hour or something like that ago. So by tomorrow, this is going to be absolutely rigid, and it'll be just as solid as if it was assembled with screws. But the nice thing about this, of course, if you have to take it apart, all you have to do is put a knife blade or a razor blade between the chassis and the body, and it'll just pop right back off again. So it's really, really simple. There's virtually nothing to go wrong with it. I've got it hardwired, and as you can see, I just used a really small wire. And I'll probably color this one black. But it started as an experiment just to see if I could actually build one. And it worked, and I'm glad I took the time to do it. It looks nice, it runs splendidly, it works really, really well. Good bright light, flicker-free, and again, the best part is it cost nothing. Just made out of parts out of the parts box. Is it perfect? Nope, it sure isn't. The nice thing about it, of course, is the fact that it was free. I built it myself, and it was made completely out of junk. Just stuff out of the parts box. And a lot of this stuff, when I get these parts, I'll buy a box of parts and throw it under the bench or under the layout table. And it'll sit there sometimes for a year. until I find a use for it. But you never know when something is going to come in handy. In this case, I had this tender body, and it's been under the bench in the other room for, I don't know, months. And didn't have any use for it at all because I didn't have a chassis for it. I just had the body. And then when I started putting bits and pieces together, I discovered that the chassis would fit as long as I epoxied it. There's no way to screw it together because none of the holes line up. It's just not designed. This chassis is not designed to fit this body. And it is about a 1/16 of an inch wider than the chassis is. So it wasn't made for it. But that's the neat thing about epoxy. It'll fill spaces. And so I just basically lined everything up once I got it finalized, and then just epoxied it together, held it for 5 minutes, and then let the epoxy set. And I actually clamped this in a vise while the epoxy cured. And like I said, this is a bit wider than the chassis is. And so I just kind of squeezed it down to fit with epoxy on either side and on either end until the epoxy cured. It takes 5 minutes. Give it 10 minutes, and it's actually quite rigid. And then overnight, of course, it'll become absolutely solid. But I just want to do a quick video on this. It works. It's really simple to do it. It's straightforward. It's time-consuming, and it's not particularly difficult. It's just fidgety. There's a lot of stuff you have to do to build this thing. You know, you have to modify the truck and then modify the chassis to fit a Lionel truck, and then wire it, and then modify the body to mount this floodlight, spotlight, whatever you want to call it. But as you can see, that came out rather well. And it has a nice finished effect. And best of all, of course, is the fact that it works. It works really, really well. Like I said, I now have a lighted slope back tinder where I did not have one yesterday. So it works well, it looks nice, and best of all, it costs absolutely nothing. So if you're willing to put some time into this, you can make some pretty interesting cars out of a box of junk. And that's the fun part. I really enjoy doing this. And of course, once it's built, you have the satisfaction of sitting back and watching it run. So, more than happy with this. Like I said, it took a couple hours to actually put it together, but it was well worth the effort because now I have a lighted slope back tinder. Like I said, I did not have one yesterday. So, quite pleased with it. It looks nice, it runs well, it works absolutely perfectly, and it cost nothing. Really difficult to beat that combination. So I just want to do a quick follow-up video on finishing this slope back tinder, made completely out of junk. And like I said, I can use an ink marker and just touch up this truck. It'll match the rear one, and no one would ever know that this was assembled out of parts under the layout, the table. And just a box of junk. That's really what all it was. Stuff that I hadn't used before. I didn't have any use for it, like this Lionel slope back tinder shell. Didn't have a chassis for it, so a bit of judicious modification and some epoxy, 2 hours of my time, and I now have a lighted tinder that works just splendidly. Anyway, I just want to do a quick follow-up video on this. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email, BENZTRAINZ@gmail.com. And as always, thank you for watching.